Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How to Be a Badass Witch 2 by Michael Anderle, narrated by Holly Adams. Chapter 1. Kira McDonough stared at the wreckage on the table in front of her and decided she wasn't physically or mentally able to deal with the mess right now. It was the largest breakfast she'd eaten in her life, including during her teenage years when she'd participated in multiple sports. It contained an 8-egg omelet containing cheese, onions, green peppers, avocados, and ham sprinkled with black pepper, 6 pieces of buttered whole wheat toast, a stack of waffles covered with syrup, and most of a package of breakfast sausages. She washed it down with a glass of orange juice and a cup of coffee with more creamer than usual, and a banana for good measure. After all, vitamins were important. Or something. She felt like someone had magically inserted an anvil into the center of her torso. She hadn't checked her grimoire for that spell, but she was living proof that it existed. She was absolutely sure it would be impossible to get out of her chair right now. A lifetime of living in a diet-obsessed culture had not prepared her for the challenge of trying to gain weight. Her appetite was way up lately, a side effect of casting too many spells. Despite eating like an Olympic athlete, she'd been losing weight. She kept trying to counteract it with more food, but she was reaching the limits of her stomach's endurance. Just this morning, for instance, she had woken up to find out she was 5 pounds down after eating a gigantic burrito, a bag of chips, and 3 candy bars the night before. Hence this morning's gigantic breakfast. Mrs. Kim had been sending home-cooked Korean food by the bucketful, and she was not going to be pleased if Kira lost more weight. She had stated unequivocally that Kira's homework was to get back to her normal size. Mrs. Kim was a polite woman in her 40s, always generous and kind. And yet, Kira got the sense that she would not want to piss the woman off. She flopped down on her bed and clicked on the old TV. After the weather report, the anchors began discussing the main story, resurging gang violence. According to the LAPD, the increase was incremental but still worrisome, and they were doing everything in their power to first contain it and then roll it back. An expert crime analyst appeared, commenting that the overall trend in gang warfare had been downwards in LA since the mid-1990s, but it had never completely gone away and probably never would. She glanced around her home. It bore tiny, subtle signs of her new magic use. A scorch mark on the wall here, a stack of notebooks there. Even the gym equipment she'd finally set up in the corner of the open space was related. She didn't want to rely on her magic when she confronted gang members. It was also why she was watching the news. In the past, she had mainly used the television to create ambient background noise while she studied or cleaned. It was her version of white noise, and was especially welcome now that she lived alone. Lately, however, she had begun to do things that showed up on the news, and keeping track of which details about her got noticed helped her avoid being found out. Kira wanted to do good in the world, but she wasn't ready to be a celebrity. Particularly after Mr. Kim's warning 2 days ago. "The abilities you have are unusual, but you are not the only one who has them. Playing with those forces can be dangerous, not only to your health, but if others find you. That I have some knowledge of." She was still trying to work up the courage to figure out what that knowledge was. She had also reduced the pain of Mr. Kim's arthritis and halted the progress of Mrs. Kim's cancer, and she would do it again. But the idea of them knowing about the magic when even she did not understand it yet, that frightened her. After all, she still did not know who had written the grimoire that had taught her the spells. The authors were effectively anonymous, operating behind a mysterious company that seemed to have been founded for the sole purpose of publishing a single thaumaturgic grimoire. She knew they likely hadn't done so just out of the goodness of their heart, and she was getting increasingly worried about them finding her. She supposed they might be friendly, but she wasn't certain about that. Call it instinct. Her phone beeped, and she reached over to check it. She saw that she had a voicemail from her mother and a new text from Mr. Kim, asking her to swing by when she had the time. Kara set the phone down and sighed as she leaned to shut off the TV. A commercial for a new steakhouse up in Glendale was blaring, and despite the gargantuan breakfast, her stomach grumbled. She also felt tired, though she knew that was the result of her now thwarted plan for a morning to herself. Obligations to other people always seemed to arise whenever she had some alone time in which to relax. She looked at her home gym with a grimace. She had intended to work out as soon as her stomach felt better, but it looked like that wasn't an option now. The workouts were complicating her attempts to stave off the weight loss, but she was worried about relying too heavily on her magic. The stronger and more capable she was, the less she would need magic to help her. Having scrounged up some parts from a neighbor and others from graduating college athletes, she had managed to assemble a small but viable home gym. The centerpiece of it was a weight bench, old and ripped, but perfectly serviceable, with multiple configurations for working different limbs and muscle groups via a system of jointed levers holding thick iron discs. On the far side of the bench, and surrounded by a generous helping of elbow room, was her heavy punching bag. Z, her motorcycle, had been forced to give up half the space that had once belonged exclusively to him. In addition, Kira had mounted a chin-up bar between two of the slats on the side of the warehouse. She wanted to get a treadmill as well, but there was only so much a person could do, or afford, at once. Even a used treadmill wasn't in her budget right now, especially since she had no way to haul it home. As she went to take a shower, she mentally rearranged her day so she could work out later. If it takes half a year, she promised herself, I'm going to be twice as strong as I was when I was 19. I better, anyway, with all the goddamn protein I've been putting away. Look what they fucking did. Johnny Torres had stitches in the side of his head, two of his fingers wrapped and splinted, and a fascinating variety of purple bruises, but no one, including him, was paying much attention to that. Instead, they were paying attention to the phone he held up, showing pictures of his recently refurbished Mustang. More recently, unfortunately, the car had been the target of something. Johnny still didn't know what. The hood looked as though someone had turned on a blowtorch, left it sitting there while it was ignited, and then wandered off to get lunch. Damage to the engine and other internals was surprisingly minimal, but he could still look forward to a painful, expensive trip to the shop to make certain the vehicle would function. As Johnny scrolled through the pictures, a muscle jumped on his jaw. He knew what was coming next, and he was not looking forward to it. His boss settled back in her chair finally and gazed into the middle distance, considering something. Pauline Smith wore suits to show off a strenuously thin figure. Her hair and nails were always immaculate, and she tended to speak in the sort of corporate jargon that made anyone listening immediately tune out. All in all, she was the sort of woman one might look at and erroneously assume was just another advancement-obsessed business school graduate. Johnny wouldn't have given her another glance on the street, at least, not with regard to her character. Everything about Pauline looked predictable. He now knew, however, that Pauline's golden hair was dyed darker, not lighter, that her brown eyes weren't brown, but were colored contacts over ice-blue irises. Her last name wasn't Smith either, but Testrovsky. Pauline often spoke about building a better tomorrow and using their platform to create a more peaceful world. What she was talking about was getting most of the populace hooked on drugs so they would be docile and easily led, no match for the dictatorship she intended to create. Johnny believed that she was batshit crazy, and he had no idea what she was going to say about this. He just knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. She had to understand. He genuinely didn't remember the night before, and he couldn't figure out how the damage had been done to his car. Given his injuries, there had been a confrontation of some sort, but Johnny didn't remember it. All he knew was that he had woken up injured in a damaged car, with a note hung from on his rearview mirror that said L.A. Witch Territory, hands off. "Johnny," Pauline said finally, "do you have any reason to believe it was the people from the Mermaid who did this? The ones you were trying to persuade to enter into a partnership with us?" Johnny shook his head. "I don't think so. The owner was being stubborn before, but they're pretty tame. All bark, no bite. Whoever did this had more teeth than that." "Let's see that note again." Pauline extended her hand. Johnny pulled out the crumpled piece of paper and gave it to her. There wasn't much to the thing, merely a warning not to infringe on the territory of the so-called L.A. witches. Pauline sank her chin into one hand as she stared at it. "It doesn't matter who these competitors are," she said finally. "I only care about them insofar as they're obstacles, unexpected ones." The only other sound in the room was the rustle of pen on paper as Leah wrote, taking down meeting notes. Pauline looked at Sven and Johnny. "Neither of you mentioned the L.A. witches in your research about Little Tokyo and Chinatown." The two men shifted uncomfortably. They had been sent to evaluate which gangs were operating in the first territories Pauline had staked out. Her plans, which had mainly been successful so far, had been based on their intel, and this latest snag would logically have resulted from their oversight. Pauline, however, surprised Johnny. "I have also never heard of this group," she admitted. "Leah?" Leah looked up with a deer-in-the-headlights expression. She, like Sven, was afraid of Pauline. "No," she said quietly. Pauline tapped her black manicured nails on the table. "Well then, there are two possibilities. One, that this gang is attempting the same thing we are, and our interference has caused them to show their hand early. And two, that they were formed in response to us. Either begs the question of what their endgame is, and how they managed to do that." She nodded at Johnny and his phone. Johnny let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It hurt his ribs, but he could hardly feel that against the wave of relief. He had only disdain for people who were terrified of their gang leaders, but he couldn't seem to get a handle on Pauline. She was violence wrapped up in a boring corporate veneer. He had been worried that she wouldn't believe him. He was still unsettled. He wasn't entirely sure why he was willing to tell her the truth. His original instinct had been to hide it. After all, admitting he'd gotten beat up was not going to look good. Admitting he didn't remember how was worse. He wondered now if he had done it partly so Pauline would ream him out and tell him he was being an idiot, so she would come up with some rational way this had happened. Because when you got beaten up and your car got fucked up in a way that made no sense, and you forgot all of it, and someone took credit for it while calling themselves a witch, well, you came to certain conclusions. Pauline fixed him with a stare. "We need to find out their identities, their bases of operations, and their weak links. Then we exploit those links to degrade and sabotage their foothold." Johnny nodded. Finally, he and Pauline agreed on something. Take out the fuckers who had done this to his car. An arch of one blonde eyebrow told him she wasn't willing to play entirely nice, however. "And if they have any high-quality employees, we find ways to entice them or threaten them into working for us instead. We can always use good people." Johnny was a hair's breadth from snarling.
"If you think I'm going to recruit the assholes who did this—"
Pauline met his eyes with a sardonic smile and lifted one shoulder. "Prove to me that I don't need to."
"Blonde bitch."
Johnny's life had been too full of those lately. To his surprise, there was a new feeling in his chest. Respect. Pauline had maneuvered him into a corner. She had believed his research. She was giving him a chance to eliminate this person, playing him against his own pride. Johnny gave her a long look. He could almost swear she was smiling. He felt the urge to do the same. He gave her a nod and left the room. He was going to find out who the hell these L.A. witches were, and he was going to take them down. They might show up like ghosts, but there was one thing he knew about people who came in strong. They didn't know how to play the long game. He'd been in the gang world since he was 11 years old. There was no way these people knew what they were in for. Mia Angel and Doug Lopez sat together on a bench near the Ross Snyder Rec Center, watching the wispy white clouds waft over the sun and the fronds of palm trees sway in the breeze. They'd finished their lunch, and Doug continued to sip what was left of his drink, making the straw gurgle as it struggled to get the last of the lemonade out between the ice cubes. "Man," said Mia, "I have got to stop having lunch with you. Every time I do, we end up eating something that chips about 6 months off my lifespan." Her fellow reporter shrugged and tossed his empty cup into a nearby trash can.
"You have to admit, their burgers are amazing. Love it when they char the outside but leave the slightest trace of pink in the middle."
Mia preferred her ground beef to be uniformly well done, so she kept her mouth shut for the time being. Doug changed the subject.
"So we have to choose. Gary said we have until the end of today to make a decision."
Mia sighed. After they had wrapped up their last investigative project, their boss at Channel 7 had given them a choice. Do a story on the developing gang violence or the famous but elusive motorcycle man. In Los Angeles, gang violence coverage wasn't a prestigious assignment. It was just dangerous, the sort of thing everyone had to do in order to pay their dues. Media across the country, however, were beginning to tune into the rising wave of violence, which meant the two of them had a chance of winding up on national news. On the other hand, there was Motorcycle Man. The story was beyond interesting, but... "Have you heard anything new?" Mia asked Doug. He shook his head. She blew out an annoyed breath. "Great, me either. A great story like that comes along, and, of course, it's the one time in modern history when no one is able to capture anything on their phone cameras." Doug rolled his tongue around his mouth as he thought.
"Maybe that's what we focus on for the angle. The sheer lack of info is, in itself, kinda interesting. Makes it more mysterious. A man in black on a motorcycle appears out of nowhere, saves everyone after a potentially deadly freeway crash, and then disappears back into the night before anyone knows what the hell happened. People are begging for a follow-up. Yeah, and we don't have the first fucking idea how to give it to them." Mia shook her head. "This is a trap project. We have to be careful. Half the populace doesn't trust journalists anymore, so if we embellish it too much, it'll just seem ridiculous. Then again, how do you embellish a story in which a guy practically rips a car in half with his bare hands? A small guy, too. That's what the eyewitnesses are saying, anyway." She sighed. "But yeah, vids would help." Doug looked out the window and chuckled softly to himself. The most amazing part is that he stopped to begin with. Do you ever think about ceasing to drive while you're on the goddamned 10?
"Good point," Mia laughed. "Pretty sure I'd have to, see someone walking on water before I even slowed down."
"Right," said her partner. "Because by that point, You know you're dealing with miracles anyway, so it'll all work out somehow.
Mia bit her tongue. Doug's cynicism tended to crack her up, and she was fairly certain it had rubbed off on her since they'd started working together. They worked well together, too. Ironically, that was why they had this impossible choice. Since their last project had been well received, their boss wanted to let them pick their next one. Mia supposed it wasn't his fault that there weren't any good options. The waiter dropped off their check, and both of them leaned over to check their totals. As she pulled bills out of her wallet, she muttered, "It's rare, though, to the point of being nonsensical. A good Samaritan appears out of the blue and makes no effort to get credit for his heroics, let alone a material reward. What is the world coming to?" Doug signed the check.
It's a shame. It truly is. A wasted opportunity. That guy squandered his big shot at 15 seconds of fame. So are we decided? We're doing the motorcycle man story?
I don't know, Mia hedged. I tend to prefer topics I can actually, get information about. And what's with the supposed new gang? The L.A. Witches or something?
Might just be kids playing Harry Potter, Doug said, shrugging.
I don't know. Mia got to her feet and stretched as a cyclist went by, glaring at her for daring to stand near his sidewalk. She ignored him and went on. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be L.A. Witches or L.A. Bitches, but definitely L.A. something. Could be Zilches, for all we know, and who would really care? Her partner stood up, too.
Maybe Snitches. But that would be an incredibly stupid name for a gang. All the other ones would drop whatever they were doing to come beat the shit out of them and then shoot their dog for good measure. Anyway, if it's witches, then it's probably a girl gang.
I wouldn't leap to that conclusion, Mia commented. But it's likely, yeah. Want to track them down and see if we can do another gang expose? I think the masses are starting to get tired of those, but... Doug made a sour face.
I don't know. Maybe we should just tell him we'll take both.
Mia led the way down the sidewalk toward the lot where they'd parked the car. For once, I think you're right, she quipped. Oh, and, by the way, next time I'm choosing where we eat, something healthy.
If you insist, Doug sighed. Just make sure they have something good on the menu. And I want to be clear, good means fried.
Kale chips? Coming right up. Mia gave him a thumbs up. Oh, you think I'm joking? I'm not. That's a thing. Chapter 2. Her walk to the Kim's grocery store was brisk but pleasant. Kara normally preferred to take her motorcycle, but she was beginning to worry that someone might notice Z. She knew she'd been noteworthy before. Almost everyone turned to watch when a motorcycle went past, but now there was a certain fascination with people on bikes. One of them, after all, was the mysterious rider who had saved 3 people from a burning car wreck. Kara wasn't yet ready for the world to know that was her, and she didn't like the idea of people watching her, even if she could conceivably just lie. After she pushed her way into the store, she waved to Sam, who was watching the counter. He was, if Kira recalled, only 16, but she imagined that child labor laws were a bit more lax than usual when it came to part-time work at the family business. Mr. Kim was in the back, loading bags of chips onto a shelf. "Hi, Mr. Kim," Kira said.
"Kira! Hello!"
He stood up and brushed off his hands before holding one out to shake hers warmly. Sam's father was a trim man of about her height, with graying hair and a lined, worn face. Despite the aches and pains that came with his age, he was usually smiling, and he was always polite.
"How are you?"
"Good, thank you. And thank you for the latest shipment of food." Kira looked at Sam, who had delivered it. "Thank you, too, Sam." Sam, firmly in the middle of an awkward teenage stage, flushed bright red and gave a shrug and a nod. The Kims had been sending him with Mrs. Kim's homemade Korean food, something that had made the task of eating far more enjoyable.
"You're welcome,"
Mr. Kim said.
"I would caution you that it is difficult to keep a healthy waistline when eating my wife's cooking, but you seem to be one of the few people who is not troubled by that."
His eyes twinkled knowingly. Kira put her hands in her pockets and tried not to wince when her stomach gave a loud growl.
"You still have a date soon?"
"Oh, yes, I do." Mr. Kim nodded seriously.
"Are you two still coming to dinner?"
Now that he had brought it up, she realized she hadn't yet floated the idea of going to the Kim's place for dinner to Christian. She'd asked him out, and he'd said yes, but she was certain that wasn't what he'd had in mind. Besides, her nerves had her questioning if Christian was actually looking forward to the date. Talking to him about this part was not something she was excited about. She couldn't say it was precisely the same set of emotions she would feel if she were bringing someone home to her parents, though she'd rather bring someone to meet the Kims than her mother. But there was still a sense of embarrassment. Would Christian like the Kims? Would he think it was weird that she was bringing him to meet them? After all, what kind of first date was that? And what if they didn't like him? She said. Well, as long as Chris is okay with it, yes. Damn it! She could kick the ass of guys with guns and gang backup, and here she was, too worried about being rude to draw a line in the sand. She hoped the gangs never figured out that her weakness was Korean food and politeness. Mr. Kim's knowing smile said he could see some of what was going through her head since he had once been her age. It also said that he wasn't prepared to offer her an out.
"You are like a daughter,"
he reminded her.
"Your parents would want someone to check him out."
"Do you know my mom?" Kira inquired, raising an eyebrow. For a second, she could nearly believe her mother had surreptitiously recruited the locals to keep an eye on her. Kim's smile widened a little.
"No, I just know parents. They are the same everywhere. They all worry. Also,"
he beckoned her over to the counter with him. Curiously, she watched as he went behind it and rummaged around. Even Sam seemed curious to see what his father had hidden. After a moment, Mr. Kim stood up with a stack of notebooks and some stick-on page markers.
"These are for you."
Kira's stomach fluttered, and she struggled not to panic. Since she had begun practicing magic, she had been taking an insane quantity of notes. One of the first spells she had tried, a memory-erasing spell she had also used on her boss and a gang member, got stronger the more often it was practiced, and the more often the user practiced magic. Therefore, taking notes was essential. She had started with hundreds of post-it notes, and now started buying notebooks by the dozen. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Even knowing that Mr. Kim was aware of her abilities, she was still worried by the fact that he was seeing parts of it. "He doesn't know why you've been buying them," her mind insisted. But she still felt hunted. If he could see things, people with intentions that were not as good might also see them. Mr. Kim noticed the discomfort on her face and asked Sam to go get something from the back. When the boy was gone, the older man leaned forward and tapped on the counter to get Kira's attention. His voice and face were grave, yet kind.
"Do not worry. I know why you have been buying them, more or less. Every person who seeks truth, who practices gata, will eventually have such problems. It is the one absolute trait you find in new students."
Oh. That didn't set her mind at ease. If many people knew that was a sign of a new practitioner of magic, how many people had she tipped off without realizing it? Then another thought caught up with her. Why do they teach that spell so early? It's a menace. He laughed, the first belly laugh she had ever heard from him. He was always polite and kind, But now she saw that he had a genuine appreciation for life.
"I don't know," he admitted. "I remember thinking the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?